Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott, and this is dedicated to all those spirits out there who believe life is meant to be magical and fun. Here we venture to share the very mysteries of self and reality. My purpose is to help light that spark inside of you, to reawaken your sense of fascination and awe towards the world. I'm going to try to help you hack reality and unleash your potential and open unlimited possibilities of wealth, health, and relationships in your life. Welcome to the Reality Revolution. So excited to have Will Pye with us today. Will Pye is a visionary writer. He has written some incredible books, The Gratitude Prescription and Blessed with a Brain Tumor. And he is a visionary entrepreneur, transformational coach, a speaker, a spiritual teacher. He went through a quest in his 20s to understand human nature and overcome his suicidal depression. He has enjoyed business success, raising millions of dollars for leading charities. And after a series of awakenings and then a brain tumor diagnosis, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, inspired a new direction. Will has given talks, meetings, workshops, retreats globally, sharing the power of presence and gratitude for well-being and awakening. I would refer to Will as a gratitude specialist, somebody who has gone through an incredible journey, and I'm so excited for you guys to get to know him and meet him. What I've learned in a short period of time from reading Will's books is some of the secrets to enhance my own gratitude and how I can use gratitude in my life. And so I'm so excited for you guys to get a chance to learn from him. Welcome, Will. We've had a few recording problems at the beginning. This is like our second time doing this, but finally got it going here. So welcome. How you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely, 100%. So just for people who haven't heard of you or read your book, I just wanted you to give a little idea of your journey, how you came to this point where you're at right now.
Sure. Well, growing up in the UK, I was, as a teenager, presented with two choices, if you like, to explain this world, to explain the nature of reality. One of them was a fairly dogmatic Christianity, pretty poorly represented, and the other was atheistic materialism. So these were kind of my choices. And as a really curious young man, both of these visions of reality clearly weren't sufficient. They did not account for all of my experience. They weren't comprehensive. And so the search began to really know truth. If there's a God, what is the nature of God? To explore spiritual pursuits and also to explore scientific research and data for really two primary motivations. The one that I've mentioned, to understand the nature of reality, to know truth, to know for myself what this life is all about. And secondarily, to end my own suffering. You know, in my years growing up, there was a pretty brutal divorce that my parents experienced. I had addiction issues in my late teens and early 20s, and ultimately reached a sort of bottomed out, if you like, in my early 20s with a really serious bout of suicidal depression. So it was the desire to end my suffering and to transform myself. And that really drove that pursuit of inquiry, not just to realize reality, if you like, to realize truth, but to do so in such a way that I could transform my neurology, my experience of reality. And then, of course, as life has continued, to help others and serve others in their transformation and in their awakening.
I just was thinking last night how the visceral way that you wrote about, you have this golf ball sized tumor in your head. And I know that it's anybody can put themselves in your shoes. I don't know if anybody can put themselves in your shoes. It's very difficult. I can try to imagine, but the fear and the overwhelming emotion and the thoughts and the way that you just start to sense everything in your body and it just the intensity of this, to be able to find gratitude with such an intense, powerful emotion, it's pretty amazing. That's part of the gift that you're talking about, correct?
Yeah, for sure. And that was part of the initiation, if you like, right, as I would describe it, the diagnosis of the brain tumor. And just a little while before, and this is how I start off that first book in Blessed with, a Zen master, a teacher of mine, said to me, Will, some big, I'm not sure if I can swear, some big SHIT is going to happen in your life at some point. And the reason we meditate, the reason we cultivate a strong practice of presence equanimity and not turning away is that at such a time we can be useful, that we're not going to be caught in reactivity or running around like a headless chicken, but we can actually show up and help. The next day, my lover at the time, I was advised, she was on the other side of the world, had just come out of emergency brain surgery. She'd had a brain aneurysm at 34. And then just 3 months later, I had that diagnosis myself. She's doing wonderfully well, I hasten to add. And what was curious for me in that diagnosis moment, as you say, typically would be perceived to be a highly stressful, fearful event. And yet my experience was deep peace, a sense of curiosity, and a deep knowing, I would say, perhaps on a soulful level, that this was part of the journey, that this was an opportunity to grow and evolve. And that was really confirmed by the first words that I read when I left the hospital, deep in this sort of feeling of all is well, in this feeling of peace. And my mind being kind of curious, like, is that a legitimate response? Is that okay to be okay with this? Am I in shock or something? Mm-hmm. And I got back to my apartment and I read the quote that I'd written in my journal 5 days before. No other words around it, just this quote. It said, death is certain, its timing uncertain. So what's important now? And of course, that was just like the absolute perfect framing of the experience. And I've really lived my life since attempting to answer that question each day, and being a coach, becoming a coach and a teacher, and writing the books, and Love and Truth Party, where we're giving out love letters from the universe to the world. All of that was a response to that question.
Right. So we talk in law of attraction and reality creation, we always talk about gratitude, but in a way, when you listen to it, it's kind of a throwaway. Oh, by the way, make sure you're grateful and talk and grateful at the end. And really, it may be the most important aspect. Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about how gratitude is a signature of the thing that you want. It's the perfect signature of the feeling of whatever it is that you'd want. And so finding a way to capture gratitude is pretty powerful. And I was not aware. Sometimes when we talk about gratitude, we just think it's a happy, uplifting feeling. But your book really details linking and separating what gratitude is, linking it to positivity, how to differentiate it, how to use it. You have some terrific exercises on how to enhance the gratitude. One of my favorite exercise where I read both books. I think this exercise is in the gratitude prescription, where you were at the beach yelling for 45 minutes. Things that you were grateful for. It reminded me of something that I had done very similar, and I can't wait to do something like that, because I know that can be pretty transformational. But some of these exercises were pretty interesting and fantastic, and you really worked on it. Just wanted to get your perspective on some of the stuff that you came up with for this book.
Yeah, I mean, that particular example you mentioned is one of my favorites. Also, I recall the beach in New Zealand.
Right, yeah.
The wind was blowing, the rain was falling. It was a bad day, a miserable day by some definitions. And yet this practice was literally to shout, to sing, to speak praise to all the goodness in my life, and to keep going.
Right.
This is one of the powerful practices, whether it's writing it down on an A4 pad or singing or shouting out to the world, to keep going. Because often the mind will stop after the first 10 or 15 things that we're grateful for, right? Like our favorite sports team, our parents, our family, sunsets, chocolate brownies. And then we're like, is there anything else? But then if we actually just allow that stream of consciousness to go, we realize there's literally infinite things that we appreciate and are grateful for. And that is a very powerful way to activate the energy system in such a way that we're in joy, we're in love, and we're fully receiving the goodness and the glory of being alive.
And that's the two things that you really focus on in your books. The first book really talks a lot more about receiving, and you talk about gifts and the gifts. And these are two powerful lessons. And a lot of times, because we want things to look more advanced, things we want to look at science and stuff, but these two particular topics may be the most important: receiving and gratitude. So I want to talk a little bit about receiving as well. You've done a really good job of opening up to receiving, that everything can be a gift. It's very interrelated to gratitude. And I wanted to get your perspective on changing your mindset to adapting to becoming opening yourself up to the gifts of the world. And allowing yourself to receive these gifts. And obviously that was part of your awakening in the transition, something that you clearly coach. And I wanted to get an idea, just to have you elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure, Brian. I think that a good metaphor is, or a simile is, when we look at, for example, our diet. Like, we might be getting plenty of zinc and magnesium, for example, but there might be something we're missing such that we're not actually absorbing that nutrient. So we then need to add something to allow us to actually receive what's there.
Right.
Even more powerful, perhaps, is our breath. Like, we're not generally trained to breathe, but if we encounter any form of breath work, we discover that there are ways to breathe more deeply and more fully, to actually receive more of the oxygen that's all around us, to absorb oxygen more deeply into our cells. So we see how with breath, it's right here, but volitionally and with choice, we can receive more of it by making a choice to do so. For me, gratitude is really the mechanism by which we receive more of the general abundance of being, and specifically love. Like, I would say God's love, or the universe's love for us, to consciously take the decision to really receive that, to receive it in the breath, to receive it in the beauty around us, to receive it through the fact that we can see and perceive and we're aware in our being and our bodies. It's, for me, a very deep practice to be doing that on an ongoing basis.
And people aren't aware. They oftentimes will block some of the gifts that are being given to them. You see it when I go to the restaurant with my friends, and can I buy you dinner? No, that's okay. I'll go ahead and get it. And no, I have no problem buying you dinner. And you can see that they're just not willing to accept those gifts. There's a part of them that thinks that it's wrong. And maybe it spreads out to other parts of their life they're not even aware of it. Am I right? Does that make sense?
For sure. It's a curious social etiquette, it seems, isn't it? That we say, oh, no, I couldn't possibly.
Right.
And yet the deeper truth is, we're not only denying ourselves in that moment, if that's happening in our experience, to actually receive the gift and just say, yeah, thanks. I'm worth a free lunch for sure. Thank you very much. But more powerfully, perhaps, to realize we're denying that person the gift of giving, because they're giving, they're feeling that call to give because it feels good, right?
Exactly.
I think, to touch on that briefly as well, I'd say that one of the groups of people in our world who may find that being particularly prevalent is mothers, because they're biologically wired, beautifully biologically wired and socially conditioned to serve the other, to protect the other, to look after the child, to put someone else other than themselves first. And that's a great strength, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful thing to have a loving motherly presence. I bow to my wonderful mum in that moment. And yet, perhaps especially as kids grow up, as they become 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and need less of mum, now suddenly the mother's in a role where she's able to look after herself and place herself front and center. And that can often be quite a transition and quite a challenge, because they're so used to putting someone else first, they might feel guilty or doubtful that it's the right thing to actually just focus on themselves and receive the love, receive the abundance, receive the joy, receive their life purpose being expressed, or whatever it might be. So whether mothers or not, I think all of us can perhaps learn to open to receive more fully and more consciously.
Absolutely, 100%. So I always like to ask when we have people on the show is, because you've obviously developed this, and over time it's probably improved and it's probably changing every day. But I want to get an idea of what your morning routine is when you wake up, and what your process is in the morning. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? I'm kind of a collector of morning routines. I'm fascinated by anybody, especially that's exploring it, and it's a spiritual explorer, what your morning routine is.
Yeah, for sure. It's such an important thing how we top and tail the day. And I'm always designing and experimenting with new regimes. One of my desires is to not be too routinized, to not be too stuck in habitual behaviors. And yet, of course, a great power is found in the habitualizing our sleep patterns, our eating, and so on, to take care of that happening in a way that's good and healthy and nourishing, and not having to think about it every day. My optimum, which is my typical, would be I'd wake up at around 4:30 or 5 o'clock. I endeavor to jump out of bed in enthusiasm. It probably happens about 80 to 90% of the time. So actually, like in that first moment, to jump out and really embrace the day, to open my arms, to take a deep breath. If the sun is shining at that point, to look out and see the beauty outside. I'll then start with a breath work, usually a circular breath routine. Transformational breath is probably the modality that people would be able to access that through. It's very simply connecting the in and the out, so there's no pause between the two. So it's a 20-minute meditation.
Right.
And just recently I've added some Wim Hof breathing.
Yeah, I was reading about that on Facebook. You were experimenting with Wim Hof? Yeah. I have done that too. I'm fascinated by it.
It's powerful stuff, isn't it?
It is. I don't know if the cold shower is enough. When I read, you see Wim Hof, he's jumping in this super cold lake so I don't know. I think the cold shower works, but the breathing technique itself is very powerful. But clearly your body is warmed up when you do that. You can see why the interrelation, like getting yourself into a cold bath or ice, works in relation to it.
Yeah, I'm no expert, but my understanding is that the cold shower is good in and of itself. I think there is actually some research to suggest that has benefits, even just 30 seconds on the immune system and so on. But I think in Wim Hof's sort of vision, it's the beginning, as I understand it, of creating a comfort with the cold, such that you can build up to immersion in cold rivers and ice baths and beyond if one feels cool
get
to
a freezer in the backyard and plug it in and throw some water in the back, something like that.
Right. Yeah.
So then it's always kind of interrelated, and that's the evening routine. And there's just as much of a little bit of a routine with that. So you're waking up early and you get this on a regular basis. What's your evening routine? How do you settle down and do you get 8 hours of sleep? Is that enough for you? Yeah.
Yeah. For me, hitting the 8 hours somewhere close to is important. Of course, I don't always achieve that. If I've got a podcast that I've got to do late in the evening, because that's the only time I can do it with my friends in the US or wherever it might be, then I'll have a later night on that occasion. But generally, my rule is that by 8:30 p.m., all blue screen, Wi-Fi, iPhone, computer, laptop, everything's off.
Turn it off.
And I'm looking to start to wind down. Again, I'll have the 20-minute of breath. So that's the top and tail at the beginning, at the end of the day. And I endeavor to be in bed by 9 o'clock. But I tell you, the last week, I probably only hit that like 2 days out of the last 7, I'd say. It's been quite challenging. There's been a lot going on. Mm-hmm. But if not 9 o'clock, then like by 9:30, by 10 at the absolute latest. But of course, life happens, and sometimes there are events and time zone shifts that all this gets messed up. And then it starts again. So there's a constant experimentation, checking in. I journal and I record all those key things. Mm-hmm. So I'll actually put in there and I'll give it a tick if it's where I want it to be. And if it needs adjustment the next day, then I'll make that adjustment. The journaling is important, not every morning and every night, but most. And that will include reflecting on what I appreciate, praising the glory of being, and drawing attention to things, not only that I have in my life that I appreciate now, but perhaps things that I want to be experiencing and desire to be experiencing, giving attention to that as being real now as well.
It's one thing to overcome a brain tumor and go through the journey that you did. It's another thing to write a really fantastic book that's well documented and researched. As a fellow writer, I'm impressed by that. I mean, did it help you to write this while you were going through this struggle? Did it help you to vent and release some of it, what was going on? Were you writing this during the process, or did you write it after?
The first book I began writing pretty soon after being diagnosed. Uh-huh. And then I completed it after I'd had brain surgery. So it was very much straddling that whole process. Right. Initially just focusing 100% on psycho-spiritual approaches, on alternative approaches, and then reaching a point where I felt it was necessary to utilize the surgery. And that's why I actually completed the book after that. And certainly writing the books has been helpful because it's very purposeful for me. That was part of the answer to that question, is to do what I'm here to do, to be what I'm here to be. And that includes being a writer and serving people in their health and awakening and their well-being. And books are a great way to facilitate that. There's nothing better than having people who you've never met sending through an email or a message to say, hey, look, I read your book and it's changed my life, or it's been on my bedside for the last 6 months. It's helped me get through my diagnosis. It's just an absolute gift to receive that, and it's so purposeful and meaningful and feels good. So it's healing and nurturing for my well-being as well.
I can't imagine. And this is I'm an avid book reader, and this is not just there has been several books where people have talked about going into remission and overcoming health problems. They're all out there. This differentiates itself. This is more than that. You're citing studies and research. You talk a little bit about physics, and it's very well intelligent, thoughtful discussion on the advantage of gratitude. And I've talked about on my podcast radio forgiveness, but radical gratitude is even greater. And finding radical gratitude in everything. And you on your Facebook, you have Facebook Live on a regular basis. You've talked about some of the stuff that you've gone through, and you've given some situations that you've gone through recently where you were able to find gratitude. And it kind of gave me a reminder. One of the things, I don't know if you've heard of reality transurfing. I recommend it if you get a chance to read it. He has this idea that we need to find an advantage in everything. Whatever happens to us, there's an advantage in it. And it's kind of the same thing that you're saying. It's this algorithm of thinking. What is the advantage? And you had this recent experience where you had flown to the United States, and then you got stuck and you had to get sent back. And what I was most impressed with was how you talked about, your first thought was, okay, well, how does this benefit me? How does this favor me? And I wanted you to just talk a little bit about that. You obviously, the experience you went through there, you learned how to deal with this stressful situation from what happened before. And so it's a good story and example. I just wanted to get your summary of what happened.
Yeah, sure. So what happened, I've been traveling to the US for many years on an ESTA, on the visa waiver scheme.
Right.
Always followed the rules and regulations, spent a lot of money in the country and so on. So I thought I was a pretty well set, valued visitor. But on this occasion, as you know, in the US right now, it's a pretty sensitive situation around immigration and not letting people in that shouldn't be getting in and so on. So there's quite a zealous mission aspect within Homeland Security. And in fact, this sort of incident has risen by 300 or 400% in the last year or two.
Right.
And they basically perceived that I had immigrant intent. They felt that I was coming to marry an American woman and stay in the US forever, which is absurd. But that was the conclusion they came to. So I was treated like a criminal and kept in a cell effectively at times adjacent to the waiting room area and questioned as if I was,
a criminal.
Here to cause great harm, exactly.
Right.
And sent on to the next plane back. And it was challenging for sure, because I had a book tour lined up. I had all sorts of events. I got lots of friends in the US. So it was pretty brutal. And the question I ask, as you say there's a powerful question, like, what's the advantage here? I've got two very similar questions. Like, what's the opportunity in this?
What's the opportunity?
And what's the gift in this?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when we ask those questions, we open ourselves up to actually hearing the answer, right? If we're approaching a challenge in that way, we might get a useful answer. And even deeper than that, perhaps, like for me, thank you is alchemical. It's something that actually can transform our experience, because the definition of thankfulness is an affirmation of the good. So if someone presents something that's bad or undesirable, and I say thank you, I'm actually in a very powerful way perceiving the goodness. And perceiving the goodness, I'm going to see the goodness. So it's like, okay, so the immediate opportunity is to be peace and love in this situation, whilst people are treating me with an absence of peace and love. Right. To return their fear and their judgment and their irritation with peace and love. And as people in the scenario around me are getting irate and angry and shouting at the security guys and so on, to be peace and love, to be the vibration of peace and love in that moment. Then there's a deeper opportunity, or maybe there's nothing deeper than that. There's a further opportunity in the material world, as it were. So like, what now am I going to do? I'm not going to spend the next 3 months in the US. I'm not going to have my book tour. So what's the opportunity in that? And that's very much still emergent. Much of that is still being created, whether that be going on a world tour with Love and Truth Party, handing out the love letters. I've got some great opportunities in Australia. It might be that I end up actually applying for a visa and coming to the US, but that didn't feel good immediately. I was like, okay, I'm gonna leave the US to chill out and calm down for a little bit, and maybe when things are a little bit better set up, I'll move in a flowful way. I don't have any feeling to fight it or to make it happen. I trust that there's a higher purpose unfolding in my not coming into the US at that point in time.
I ask anybody out there that had a big plan to go on a big trip, travel to a lot of places, and then be told, no, you can't, that your instant is disappointment and anger. And I was just so impressed by your response to it. And I think that it came from all the lessons that you learned from previously. It was very interesting. So you had said that you meditate for about 20 minutes. And so do you do a guided meditation? Do you do different kinds of meditation? Do you just do in stillness? And you talk about all the different kinds of meditation, but I just wanted to get an idea more about how you meditate.
Yeah, it's a great question because there are so many different forms of meditation. We might be talking about different things. So my standard at the moment is the 20 minutes morning and 20 minutes evening of connected breath. So essentially it's a breath work meditation, which is essentially a concentration meditation. And my background primarily is in Zen. So that would be Zazen meditation. So concentration meditation for long periods of time. And I also enjoy guided meditations for sure. Mm-hmm. If people send through, I'm experiencing this one, it's great, then I'll give that a go. I love listening to 528 Hertz, the love frequency. There are some great free resources on YouTube, as you'd be well aware. So sometimes that can be fun just to have that blasting in the background. But generally it would be a concentration meditation. And of course, the reason we meditate is to become more aware in life in general. Mm-hmm. So a great meditation would be to go for a walk in nature with no intent to get anywhere or to be back by a certain time, like just put the time aside and just to spend time in the awareness of the beauty of nature, the flowers, the play of light upon the trees, the movement of trees in the wind. There's just stunning beauty all around us. So for me, that would be a meditative practice in and of itself, to go for a nature walk, simply to absorb, and you're coming back to that idea of receiving, to actually receive the stunning beauty of sunlight, the beauty of leaves, the beauty that's surrounding us all the time, if we're lucky enough to be in close proximity to nature.
You and I, we have a similar.
I'm also a big fan of.
Go ahead.
Sorry to speak over you there.
No, that's fine.
We intersected in the ether. I was going to say I'm a big fan of embodiment practices as well, Brian. So I'm talking about yoga, about qigong. Right. Most mornings I'll connect with the earth. I'll take my bare feet outside and I'll put my feet upon this beautiful planet, and I will consciously appreciate her beauty, this extraordinary planet we're on, and do some qigong or some yoga or 10 minutes of exercise or 50 minutes of star jumps or whatever to get the body active and ready for the day as well. So I could talk a lot about meditation. There's so many different ways
Qigong that fascinates me. I do Qigong every day. And it, and to me, it's a critical part of my own morning routine. And I've even found myself, every couple hours just doing a quick Qigong exercise. It's almost like I feel like I'm a battery and I'm building up my energy when I do that. And the more I do it, the more powerful it is. And, I've talked about it on other episodes, but I recommend anybody to research it, look at it, look up Lee Holden. There's some great exercises where they're simple, they're easy, and it's a good way to harness your energy. But what I was saying before is, and you and I are on a kind of a similar spiritual journey, but different. You had this sudden moment where you were given a second chance. And I had a moment where somebody almost killed me, and I was like, I woke up the next day and I said, I'm still alive. And I was given a second chance. And there's this magic in that awareness that I'm still alive and I've been given this second chance. And I want to, and I know you do too, I want to share this feeling that we get when we suddenly realize every breath is wonderful. Everything is wonderful when we're given the second chance. I want to find a way to spread that feeling without somebody having to go through a near-death experience to experience. I think that's what I feel like your goal is with the gratitude prescription. You want people to feel this wonderful appreciation for life, the second chance, without having a brain tumor or somebody trying to shoot at you, where you realize I should be dead right now.
Yeah,
right?
I feel you deeply, brother. That's exactly it. Both the first book in particular and this organization I've set up called Love and Truth Party. We're handing out love letters from the universe, basically facilitating the exchange and the realization of the presence of love. And that's just an expression of exactly that, a desire to share the joy, a desire to share the love, to help people feel what I've felt, to help people see what I've seen, because it's, for me, there's nothing more beautiful than sharing awareness, than sharing joy, than sharing presence.
Right.
It's a beautiful thing to be able to do.
When was tell me, and clearly you started going through this journey before the brain tumor. So
100%.
Spiritual. Yeah. And so tell me about the beginning of your spiritual awakening. Did you have something that's clearly powerful that said, wow, this is different and I really want to explore this? Just explain your awakening when it first happened.
Yeah, so the beginning was, funnily enough, you see the owl there.
Right.
I had a powerful synchronistic experience that kind of functioned. I would have been 18 or 19. It kind of functioned as a big question mark. I didn't know the answer, if you like, to the question mark, but it was deeply meaningful. And I know now that was my first synchronicity. So an acausal event, an acausal coinciding of two events that aren't causally related, but there's meaning in the subjectivity as we experience it. And since then, life has treated me to so many wonderful synchronicities, including pointing me to being a writer and a coach, and making it really clear and obvious that this is part of my soul's function and part of my journey here, to serve people through my writing and to serve people through my coaching and in their transformation and awakening. So the synchronicity was the beginning and the continued guidance. Then the diving deep would have been with Zazen. And in Zen, the meditation guidance is pretty simple. It's sit down, shut up, and don't move. And sustain that for a long period of time. And insights arise during that experience. So I recall when I met my teacher was a big moment. I instantly awoke in his presence. It wasn't something that I hadn't experienced before, but I hadn't been experiencing it in the previous moments before he walked in. And in that moment, I was like, right, that's what I want. I want to have that capacity to shift people's state via my own being, via my own presence.
In their presence.
Exactly. Right. I was working in charity fundraising, trying to serve the world externally, and I still do to a large extent, but I realized there was something infinitely precious in that. So I was like, I want what he's got. And I realized pretty quickly that I already have what he's got. But I did train with him in the Zazen, in the practice, and went on sessions and retreats with him to really deepen that awakening and embody it in this nervous system. So I bow to my teacher, Jumpo Dennis Kelly Roshi, for his guidance and inspiration. I mean, awakening is a curious thing, right, Brian? It's a journey and a process. And then along the way, we have particular peaks or particular ecstatic states or falling away of self, insight into the nature of reality through direct experience. And that's my interest, is facilitating for others the direct experience of what they are. So it's not about belief. It's not about faith. It's not about a concept or a narrative or a story. It's a knowing, and it's a direct experience of the pure awareness that we are, of the divinity that we are.
Have you had a moment where that was super powerful, where you realized magic was happening? I always like to ask, like, you have something supernatural that you're like, that you've told your friends about. Does you have something? I always like to see if somebody has had supernatural or powerful experience that was that you'd like to discuss with us.
I'm thinking which one to choose. So I'll share one. I was in Australia. I'd had one. This was just after the diagnosis. I'd had one seizure prior. That was how I became aware I had a brain tumor. And I started to feel a seizure coming on. Maybe I had two prior, because I was familiar with the precursor experience of a tingling in the left hand and an altered state of consciousness. So this was really helpful to have precursor phenomena to tell me I'm about to have a grand mal seizure. I'm about to lose consciousness. So if I'm near a cliff edge, then move away from it and so on. on this occasion, it was the first time that I had had this precursor phenomena when I was alone. So there was some anxiety that arose because it was like, I kind of like to have someone here to make sure I don't do anything silly. And I called out help. And I tried to call out help again, and it went something like this, because the capacity to speak was lost. Right. And I was falling down as help became. At this point, the words "Jesus now" came out of my mouth, and I say that they came out of my mouth. I didn't say it. There was no me saying it. It was like, wow. The next thing I know, I wake up the next day in my bed, and with this clear memory, and I didn't have any. My path was Zen, was not to do with any religion, not to do with any thought system, not to do with any faith. And to look back on that, of course, I was like, wow, what's that about? And that began a really deep relationship with Christ, with the Christ consciousness, rather than with Christianity. You do not need a church to connect with Christ. You do not need a church to connect with Jesus, I would suggest. Mm-hmm. And that was, for me, the beginning of working with A Course in Miracles and many other beautiful texts that pointed me to what I understand to be the second coming of Christ, which is you and I and others upon this planet, realizing that we are also sons of God, that we are also daughters of God, that we are also loved and forgiven and in perfect peace. And that was pretty magical to say the least.
A Course in Miracles is a fascinating book because every time I read it, it's completely different. It's like, it's one of those, it's, you read it or listen to it and I don't remember any of that before. And it's really interesting how it seems to talk about what you're experiencing right now. I don't know what it was channeled. So yeah, it's just, I find it very interesting. And you've researched and read the Course of Miracles, and I find that interesting as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a gift I gave myself for my 34th birthday. I worked through the workbook from 34 to 35 very diligently every day and did all the exercises with great commitment. And what a gift, what a wonderful spiritual technology, I would call it. It's very wordy, but those words and those vibrations are very purposeful and intentional. And yeah, I'm really grateful for that book. Interesting to hear you've enjoyed it also. Right.
So let's talk a little bit about your coaching. You offer coaching. Just get a little bit idea of what kind of coaching that you offer and what your philosophy and model is for coaching for people out there that might be interested.
Yeah, for sure. I've studied mostly, so I've been a professional coach within a corporate environment for many years. I've had my own business for many years. But in terms of how I serve people most these days, I studied under a guy called Alan Seal in the Center for Transformational Presence. Mm-hmm. So it's very much about working with potential and working with presence. And it's really incredible how when I get out of the way and just show up in curiosity and in deep listening, the questions that come from there and the words that come from there create magic in a coaching dialogue. What that looks like, of course, will vary from client to client. So one client, it may be about growing their business. Another client, it may be about emotional healing primarily. Another client, it may be all about spiritual awakening. They're just really hungry and zealous in that regard. And some clients I may work with for a period of time, and it's a little bit of all of that. It could be with their relationships. That's what I love about coaching. You get to work with all sorts of different people at different stages in their development with different focuses. And I love it. I mentioned the joy of hearing from a person that's read my books, who's gained value. Even more powerful, of course, to have someone sitting in front of you and to experience moments of aha or transformation or beauty as a consequence of the dialogue that we're having. It's a real gift.
There's something that happens when you're coaching and you see somebody transform. You see people transform beyond anything that you can imagine. The process of it is pretty exhilarating and fascinating. So willpye.com is where you would get information if you wanted to have coaching with Will. And so I always like to end just on a lighter subject. I'm a huge movie fan, and I always like to ask, is there first of all, what's your favorite movie?
Oh, wow. I love movies. So there's thousands of them.
All right.
I'm actually looking at running a course with a group called Open Circle in the US with like the 7 enlightening movies. Included in that would be The Truman Show, Interstellar, Inception. And I think it's hard to go.
Oh, yeah. Great choices.
Matrix. The Matrix trilogy is pretty stunning in terms of the truth that it teaches around the coming of the Christ, essentially by episode 3. So it's a great movie on the surface level, and the deeper teachings there about the reality of the matrix that we find ourselves in, the machines that are looking to harvest our energy, the darkness that's in this wonderful reality, totally exactly how it is. And I think we're all the one. We're all awakening.
We're all the one.
Right. And we're all here to serve consciousness, to serve the awakening of humanity. And so for me, I think it's pretty hard to go past the deeper meaning of the Matrix. Other films I love, like Luc Besson is one of my favorite directors, like Le Grand Bleu, Léon. I think it's called The Professional in Australia and the US.
Right. That's when I first got on to Luc Besson, but he's had so many movies, and you could always know it's his movies right away.
Right. Very distinctive style. Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
So, and is there a movie, as a movie buff then, I always ask, is there a movie that I probably haven't heard of that you'd recommend that I'd watch? I mean, do you have some movie that I can run out right now and that I probably haven't heard of?
Great question. The Lovers of the Arctic Circle. Have you heard of that?
I have not. Lovers of the Arctic Circle. All right.
Really cool, synchronistic, beautiful, quirky, stunning. Love that film. Yeah.
And do you have a favorite fiction book that you'd recommend? Anything that inspired you?
I devoured John Steinbeck and Milan Kundera for a while, Dostoevsky. I don't read novels so much these days. I'd like to, but just for whatever reason, it doesn't happen. So what would I say would be a favorite? I love Haruki Murakami. The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle is a great text.
Yeah, when I read that, I was like, what is this? Oh my gosh, It's just so different and wonderful, and with the different varying viewpoints. That's totally fascinating that you like that. There's an interesting thing happening when I talk to law of attraction coaches and people in this. They're kind of moving away from reading fiction almost as if it's a bad thing. That reading fiction, we're putting our attention and awareness on things that can actually manifest. And that it's a real question. We watch movies and we watch fiction. We're aware of the power of our minds. So we're separating reality a little bit. It's like dreaming when we sleep. But is it dangerous what we watch and what we read? What's your opinion on that?
I wouldn't create an alarmist sense or any fear around it. And at the same time, I would say absolutely that our diet includes the entertainment that we consume. It includes the people that we're hanging around with. So I have a group coaching program called Living Impeccably, and there are 20 measures that a new person into that group will look through. And they will include having a look at our entertainment diet.
Right.
Like, is it actually serving us? It might be a really gripping show, but what's it actually teaching us? What's it actually putting into our consciousness? What's it actually telling us? What's it actually causing us to believe? So I do feel that there's some wisdom in that, to feel into one's own questioning of what is serving me and what might just be entertaining. It's possible to find both, of course, right? There are shows out there like The Matrix, like Sense8, like many other Wachowski brothers seem to like. Cloud Atlas is a great movie.
Cloud Atlas, love it.
Right. That's taking us in and expanding our consciousness. And there are many documentaries that are expanding our consciousness. So I would say, yes, it's important to be conscious and volitional in what we're consuming. And also I'd suggest something really, really important, which is that the darkness or the negativity or evil, if you like to call it that, the way to engage it, disempower it, is to love it. To not fear it, to not pretend it's not there, to love it, to laugh at its face. So this, I feel, is the alchemical power of our consciousness as well, is to not be in fear or anxiety about what is coming in or what could happen, but rather be in love with what's showing up. Now, that doesn't mean I become the darkness. It doesn't mean that I watch the darkness. But it's about that vibrational engagement with it. So it's the deep acceptance, it's the deep forgiveness, it's the deep love. And of course, in Miracles language, it's to be in total defenselessness. It's to be in total trust. In total defenselessness, I'm totally powerful.
Right. So the best way to ask this? Maybe when we talk about emotions being in your body, and you have had to focus on this, and one of the interesting things about your book is you talked about this journey with your father and this breakthrough that you had, because you had read, and it's interesting, read it, Lewis Hayes' Heal Your Body, and people storing emotions in their body and causing sicknesses, and you really focused on the psycho-spiritual causes of what was going on with you, and you had gone back to when you were a child and stuff with your father, and how brain tumors related, and you had this breakthrough where it was this moment where you told your dad you loved him, and then you both had this emotional moment. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit, just a little. There are people that are holding emotions right now that are sick. And what would you recommend to, first of all, become aware of it, and then to release these emotions? What suggestions would you have?
Yeah, it's a really rich topic, and I'll try and give a deep summary in a short second or few. So the first thing I would say is to truly feel the feeling. Don't ignore it. Don't ignore it. Don't try and suppress it. Don't try and pretend it's not there. Don't try and positively affirm that I'm feeling.
Right. I think I lost you here for a second. There you go. Okay.
The emotion.
You said that don't positively try to affirm that you're feeling. What was that after that? It's
like putting a veneer of positivity over a pile of poo, right? The pile of poo is still there.
It's still there.
Not changing it.
Right.
But if we accept that the poo's there, okay, now I can actually clean it out. But you do have to first accept it. In terms of emotions, that looks like actually feeling it. And for me, one of the great powers of breath work, particularly continuous breath, is that it allows my consciousness to come into contact with emotional charges that I may have spent many years creating an identity, doing things to not feel, to not encounter. And in the breath work, there's this beautifully powerful but gentle encountering of that feeling. And let's say that feeling arose at birth, or at 2 years old, or when my father got angry with me at 5, who knows and who cares? Right. The narrative is not important. The mental story is not important, partly because very often those feelings, those emotional charges will have arisen at a pre-mental, at a pre-verbal stage in my incarnation. So what needs to happen is rather to directly encounter, to allow that pain, if you like, to allow that child self, if you like, to come up into conscious awareness and to be accepted, to be loved. Just as if a little kid is tugging at our trousers, right? If we just push it away, it's just going to come back. But if we actually just take a moment and say, hey, Bobby, what can I do? Yeah, I'll give you a hug, sweetheart. It's taken care of, right? Until the next time he wants our attention. So first, I would say is feel it.
Feel it.
Trust in that feeling, and in the accepting. There's this wonderful quote of a humanist, Carl Rogers, a humanist psychotherapist. He said, "The curious paradox is that when we accept ourselves just as we are, we change." So in the accepting, in the full feeling, and if that means crying, if that means shouting, if that means getting the cricket bat out with the pillow and just really letting all that emotion, that emotion actually be in motion and be in fluidity, then we're free. And in the allowing of all emotion, joy then becomes possible. In the allowing of all our states of consciousness and feeling, joy is a possibility, or in fact, I would say an inevitability as a consequence after that. So it's to face the darkness, if you like, or the unconscious, and make it conscious and love it. And in that process, we're truly liberated and enlightened.
That's a wonderful answer. Thank you for that. So somebody out there that's watching or listening to this has been diagnosed with a tumor, and they're scared, probably maybe alone. They don't know what to do. I just want you to talk to them right now and tell them, give them an idea what to do, and just because you've been through this and your message is powerful. The first thing I would say is go buy your books. They're super worth it. They will have a transformative effect. But I would love to get just your message to them and what they should do.
Yeah, first and foremost, I'd say you're loved, like 100% you're loved.
Yeah.
And I would invite them to consider the possibility that there may be some deeper purpose, that there may actually be some opportunity to grow and evolve and gain from this experience. In terms of practical steps, 2 books I would point everyone to who has had a serious health diagnosis would be Mind Over Medicine by Lissa Rankin and Radical Remissions by Dr. Kelly Turner. And they provide the evidence and the support if the mind needs it. If you've got deep faith, if you know God's love, then maybe you don't need that. But they provide support for the mind to know that healing is possible, that miracles happen, and that in fact there is a formula. There is an approach that you can take to increase the likelihood that you will have an outlier result. Do things differently and you can have an outlier result. The one key I would suggest is to trust your gut, to trust your intuition. One of the funny things that happens when you're diagnosed with a serious condition is suddenly the whole world has got a cure for cancer, and they're telling you to do this and to do this. Doctors often have not always the best information. So for me, a doctor is simply part of my team. So I would encourage people to create a powerful, respectful, equal partnership with their doctor. If that's not possible with your doctor, get a doctor with whom it is. You want to be feeling good with your doctor. You want to be feeling loved and respected with your doctor, or else they're not contributing to your well-being. And to trust that inner voice, to trust the feeling of your gut, of your heart, when it comes to selecting treatment options, because the research, the science proves that that's actually the key thing that creates spontaneous remissions or miracle healings, depending upon how you want to language that.
Right.
So yeah, it's a beautiful journey, and healing is definitely possible, and miracles are definitely possible.
You talk about that. There's a few times your doctor said, I want you to do this treatment. I want you to do this. And you'd say, why? It's because that's what we do. And you had to make a choice in that moment. Your doctor's telling you should do this. You had to make a choice. I don't think I'm going to do that. That doesn't feel right. And that's a pretty scary choice to make. But your heart told you is that basically you were just your heart, your gut was telling you I shouldn't do this.
And also the facts. The facts are our healthcare system, as Marianne Williamson so eloquently articulated, is a sick care system.
It's a sick care system.
Pharmaceutical companies are amongst the most corrupt institutions upon the planet, and they've spent 50 years educating doctors, infiltrating the entire system to have doctors do what they want them to do. So doctors, in my experience, are always healers, or 90% of the time. Certainly in my experience, always have good intentions, but they're in a system of thought and a system of medicine that doesn't always allow them to provide the best advice. So I had that awareness. I have an awareness of human psychology. I have an awareness that people may have good intentions but be misguided. And I always do the research as well. So if a doctor says, take this, I look at the side effects. And if the side effects, for example, for an anti-seizure medication include seizures, include death, and include they might not actually work in stopping the seizures, I'm like, why would I be taking, and they're highly addictive, and they may create altered states of consciousness which are not cool either. I'm like, nah, I'm not interested in that. So
I just read a study. It's the chemo. They're finding that like 50% of the deaths of people that have used chemotherapy can actually be tied to the chemotherapy and not the cancer. I go into the details, but you're right. Some of these solutions, they're harsh, they're abusive, and it's a scary place to be. And I think you give some really good recommendations and suggestions. So we've talked about.
To add briefly, Brian, for some people, chemotherapy may be part of their solution. There are cancers, for example, where chemotherapy has efficacy, but not in the majority of them. If you look at the meta-analyses, it's generally not effective. But I really want to stress that it's an individual case-by-case situation.
Absolutely. Man, this has been great. We've talked about so many different topics, and now that we've gotten through this, you need to come on again and we can go deeper on some of this stuff. Because if reading your book, I know that you're fascinated by this, you're curious, you're a researcher, and We don't know the answers, but it feels like they're right, almost there. And I noticed that with you too. And I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you, and the opportunity to. I love your books are right in my wheelhouse, and I love books like The Gratitude Prescription. And I was so excited to finally read it. I can't wait to read it again and try more of these exercises. I can't recommend it enough. I have another episode where I talk a little bit more detail about what I read. But if you are struggling with gratitude, and even for people, when we talk about the law of attraction, when you want to create the world around you, oftentimes the feeling is the secret. And the key to creating that feeling is gratitude. And gratitude is hard. I have people that come to me and say, how can I create these feelings? I don't know. And the way is gratitude. And when people say, well, how do I create gratitude? I will point them to the Gratitude Prescription. It's a really thoughtful analysis on gratitude and exercises on how to increase gratitude, affirmations, stories. I think you're going to love it. Everybody, I recommend that you check this book out. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Will. Let's talk again soon, and we can talk more about this stuff. I'm so glad that you were able to get over this so you could talk on the podcast. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with the audience today?
Thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone for listening. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you so much.